Hi everyone. So today I'll do the University Press subject genres recommendation tag. Basically all you do for this tag is you choose any area of expertise or discipline. You can go however wide or narrow as you wish, and you recommend University Press books for it. It's kind of like a reading guide for introducing new readers to a field of expertise. If you need to use non-University Press books to round out your list, you can go ahead and you can do that. For example, I'm going to use languages and linguistics, which is a huge area of study. So I'm going to go just wide with this one. And the very first book, this is not a University Press book. This is just a basic standard introductory textbook for the introduction of the language. It's written by Victoria Fromkin. This is the 7th edition. It's just a standard generic textbook. I think it's pretty well written. But from this textbook you can see just how incredibly wide and varied the study of linguistics is. It covers a huge area. You have the grammar, you have the evolution, the history of language, how language changed over time, pronunciation, aspects of how you pronounce, mannerisms of pronunciation. Then you have semantics. This is the meaning of language, the more about like the grammar and syntax and stuff, and the sounds like phonics, phonology, how you learn language, the language acquisition, that would be getting into ESL learners and stuff. Then you have a very new field of study, which is human processing, which would be translations like Google Translate and stuff like that. Linguistics and computer scientists would kind of work together to make those programs available. Then you have sociolinguistics, which is the language and society, where you get into different dialects and slang and pidgins and creoles, how culture affects language. And then you have the syllables of time, which is morphology and reconstructing dead languages, which would, if for English, would be Latin. And the history of writing. Just there's so much involved in the field of linguistics. Same as there's a lot involved in the field of history. They're just such vast studies. So that's a really quick introduction to language. So the second introductory book would be The Psychology of Language. Like I mentioned, I don't have any direct psychology books, but I do like I guess you could say the periphery of psychology of language, or just psychology books. So this would be language comprehension, the mind and language, and how they work together. That would be what this book is all about, which is something that's incredibly fascinating to me. Not psychology directly, that's just meh. So getting into the psychology of language, this one is an introductory textbook. This is by Equinox Textbooks and Surveys in Linguistics. It's a series that is put out by Cardiff University. And this one is by Craig Hancock. This is Meaning-Centered Grammar. It's an introductory text for this one, so it's quite thin. This one, it's pretty fascinating. It's basically how grammar affects the meaning of whatever it is that you're saying or writing. So it's very heavy into grammar, but it does expand on it and go into meaning. So if you say like a simple sentence, your idea could be very simplistic, but very kind of mysterious and more open to interpretation. Whereas if you have like a longer sentence that's more complex, the meaning is more clear, but it's also more demanding of the reader, and it's also very, not tedious, but I guess more authoritative, depending on how you are putting the sentence together. So this book is just talking about that, but in extreme detail, for an introductory textbook. But you can see all the different subjects. It's pretty interesting. It's a pretty fascinating book, and you can see like an example of inside. So then the next one would be getting into world linguistics, I guess you could say, or languages around the world. This one is, again, not a university textbook. This is by Guy Dritscher. He's a very light-hearted writer. He's very easy to read and very enjoyable. This book is called Through the Language Glass, Why the World Looks Different in Other Languages. This one, it's basically the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or linguistic relativity, which is basically the chicken or the egg, but with language in the mind. So what you say, is it based on what you think and what you perceive, or what you think and what you perceive affects what you say? So which one comes first, your mind or your words? And that's what this one's talking about, but this one goes into the languages around the world. So there's that old, it's been debunked, but Eskimos, which is a word that you shouldn't use anymore, but Eskimos have, I think, 72 different words for snow, for example. That's kind of incorrect. It's too oversimplified, and it's not completely correct. They just have a more expansive vocabulary for snow because so much of their culture and their life revolves around snow. It's not racist, but it's kind of racist because it's generalizing them. The proper word to use is Inuit, not Eskimo, even though a lot of academics still use Eskimo. And you could also say the same thing about sailors. Sailors have a lot of words for water, but it's because they spend so much time around water. So this book is sort of touches on that. That's one of the things that's mentioned in this. But a really interesting part of it is it uses color to illustrate the differences that different speakers of different languages use when they're explaining their thoughts. English I see is very rickety language. We have a lot of words. It's very garbled. We don't have a lot of spiritual or philosophical words, whereas Sanskrit or some of these older languages would have more philosophical words. Canadian Native people have a lot of philosophical words, whereas in English I just feel like we're stunted. So this one they're using color to illustrate. Okay, so this one's a really good way to see it very clearly and easy. These are different languages and how they have classified colors, and he just used a scientific method to lay out the different colors that people would see, how they would label them, and then you can see the differences in how the different languages would have them labeled, which is a good way of saying that people that speak different languages tend to have a different way of categorizing the world, if that makes any sense. It's an amazing book. It's very straightforward. So a way to study language and the mind is to study what goes wrong with the mind. And then when you see something that's broken, it gives you a chance to see why it's broken, how it got broken, and how you can fix it, which gives you a lot more information. That's what Dr. Ramachandran does. This one is also not a University Press book, but he is very much an academic. If you're interested in the mind and language and things that break down, you can see his stuff on YouTube. He has some amazing documentaries on YouTube, or you can just read this. This is called Phantoms in the Brain, and he's just talking about all the different things that can go wrong in the brain and how to fix it, and he's got some different stories in here about that. His language is quite a little bit straightforward. This one is a little bit more difficult to read because it is a little bit more specialized, but it's still accessible. If it's too difficult for you to read, then his documentaries are absolutely amazing. So then getting into the world's writing systems, I've shown this book quite a bit on this channel. This is the world's writing systems. It's by Peter T. Daniels and William Bright. It took them a long time to actually be able to put this book together because they did not have the computer ability to put all the different letters and writing systems from the world into a single computer software program. So once they were able to create the software that would let them use different writing systems, then they were able to write this book. So that was one of the challenges that they faced. And this one it looks very scary, but it's extremely easy to read. They're very smart in how they went about this. They have the different specialists writing an essay that covers basically the same information, but for their own areas of expertise, which would be their own writing system expertise. And that way the information's correct and stuff like this. So it's basically just a whole team of different academics that are putting this one book together. And it's absolutely amazing what they've been able to do. So they have basically every section they have the chart of the different letters. This was what was really difficult for them to do without this proper software to do this, because they also have the text in the actual text as well. So they have to be able to manipulate the different letters to put them into the actual book itself. So each section, they start out with just a general rough background, a little bit of the history, how the language changed, any kind of political things that would be related to the language, any kind of controversies, some sociolinguistic problems that are happening. And then they have the chart of the different letters, and they have it broken up by basically the planet. This would be East Asian writing systems, so they have all the different East Asian systems and the history and all this kind of stuff. And each section has its own bibliography, so if you're interested in learning more about a specific language, you can easily find more information about it. So it's absolutely amazing. And that one is by Oxford University Press. So then this is another one by the same writer as the Language Relativity book. This is The Unfolding of Language by Guy Duscher. This one again is not a university press. This one is Holt. Basically, it's just the history of language, how it evolved, how we learned it, where it possibly came from, and then just basically how language basically grew up over time. So it's a pretty interesting one. Philology, this one is a little bit more specific. It's basically the history of language, but how it's attached to the history of literature. This one is Princeton University Press. This one's by James Turner. And I haven't read this one yet, but I absolutely want to read it. So if you're interested, really, really interested in literature and languages and how the two of them changed over time, and how their connection with each other changes over time, this would be an amazing book for you to read. It's also very, so far, like I said, I haven't read all of it, but so far the language is pretty friendly and accessible. It's written for people like us, just regular people, and it's also written for specialists. So if you're like a linguistics student or a literature student, or maybe if you're getting into IT and you need to, like, if you're developing online dictionaries and stuff, this maybe could be interesting to you. I'm not sure how much that would be, but it's written for basically everyone. And then the specifics. This would be one specific language and the history of one specific language. Another subject that is completely new to me that I really want to get into. This specific book is the Latin, The Story of a World Language. This is by Jürgen Leonhardt, translated by Kenneth Kronberg, and this is by Belknap, which is part of Harvard University Press. So it's just basically the history of the Latin language, its historical context, how it affected literature around it, how it affected the society and the people around it, and how it changed over time, and Latin today. So it covers quite a bit, but it's absolutely amazing, and it's written in a very, very friendly way. I find a lot of linguistic people are really good writers. That's one of my huge biases. So they have a way with words, and they're entertaining, and they're fun. So that's what this book is. Amazing, amazing, amazing. This one I have not read also. It is the Decolonizing Poetics of Indigenous Literatures. This is by Regina? Yeah, University of Regina Press. And it's pretty amazing, I think. I don't know a lot about it. It's by Marique Neuhaus. This one is seems a little bit on the specialized side. It is the native languages, how they're part of their literature, which is an oral history. So maybe the history of oral culture, and today when Native people are telling their oral history, they have to use the language of the colonizers, which in this case would be English, to tell their stories that existed before they were colonized. And because they have an oral history, how would that work? I think that's what this book is about, if I explained it properly. So because of that situation, how would they decolonize themselves using language and reclaiming their oral history? So how can they use the colonizer language, which in this case would be English? How would they use English to tell their traditional stories in a way that decolonizes themselves? So basically, how do they take back their language using English, a language that was used to colonize them? If that makes any sense. It's very kind of complicated to explain, but that's basically, I think, what this book is about. So Indigenous people have reinvented English by indigenizing it. Okay. Pronunciation is not the best. So anyways, that's what this book is about. So that's it. I hope this was entertaining and useful for you and helpful and stuff. I'll tag a few people. First, I'd like to tag Spinsters Library because she's a trained musicologist. I think that's absolutely amazing, and I wish she would talk more about musicology on her channel because she has a background in it. And Brita Bohler, she's a lawyer. She's also not a native English speaker, so I'm curious what books she would use because she has a different background than a Canadian person has. Same as Spinsters Library. And Mark at Richardson Reads, he's a librarian. He has access to so many different kinds of books, so he could choose probably any field of study that he wants to. Infinite Text, she's also a librarian for the same reason as Mark. And Steve Donoghue, he's a book reviewer and he's read a lot. I wonder which area he would go with. Jen from Remembered Reads, she's crazy smart and I wonder which area she would go with as well. And Curious Reader, she loves University Press books as well and she reads tons of nonfiction. So again, I don't even know which area she would go with. And Mark from Words Everywhere, he studied classics at university. So like the true classics, like the old Greek and Roman classics. So I wonder which ones he would go with as well. So that's all. If you see this and you want to do this tag and I haven't tagged you, you're absolutely welcome to. So thanks very much for listening and have a good day. Bye everyone.